Hello dear students, welcome back to English class. My name is Elnora and I am English teacher. It's high time to talk about press, mainly newspaper in Russia and Kyrgyzstan, as we have already talked about the press in the United States of America and the United Kingdom. The media of Russia is diverse, with a wide range of broadcast and print outlets available to the consumers. Television, magazines and newspapers are all operated by both state-owned and for-profit corporations, which depend on advertising, subscription and other sales-related revenues. Even though the Constitution of Russia guarantees freedom of speech, the country is plagued by both government and self-censorship. As a country in transition, Russia's media system is under transformation. In total, there are 93,000 media outlets in Russia, including 27,000 newspapers and magazines and 330 television channels. Television is the most popular source of information in Russia. There are 3 television channels with a nationwide outreach and a multitude of regional channels. Local and national newspapers are the second most popular choice, while the internet comes third. In all media spheres, there is a mixture of private and state ownership. There is no lack of independent media in Russia, especially in print media, radio, and internet. Russia was among the first countries to introduce radio and television. While there were few channels in the Soviet time, in the past 2 decades, many new state and privately owned radio stations and TV channels have appeared. The regional print media has been able to maintain a solid position as an information resource. However, most publishers shy away from politically charged topics in order not to endanger their business. The situation is similar in radio, where journalists have set up an internet forum in which radio journalists can publish reports that their often strictly formatted radio stations refuse to broadcast. Well, there are 3 news agencies in Russia. The first one is ITAR-TASS or ITAR-TASS. It was founded in 1904. It is a federal state-owned news agency working throughout the Soviet time as TASS or TASS. It has over 500 correspondents and broadcasts in 6 languages with 350 to 650 items daily. In 2010, it was among the 4 biggest world news agencies, with AP and AFP. It has the biggest photo archive in Russia. RIA Novosti is another state-owned news agency. RIA Novosti or RIA News is another state-owned news agency. It was founded in 1941 as the Soviet Information Bureau and in 1991 turned into the Russian information agency RIA Novosti with correspondents in 40 countries and broadcasting in 14 languages. Well, Interfax is a private news agency, part of the Interfax Information Services Group. It was founded in 1989 with over 30 agencies throughout Eastern Europe and Asia. It was the first non-state information channel in the Soviet Union, and in 1993 it established the first Russian news agency specialized in economics, Interfax, AFI. Russia has over 400 daily newspapers covering many fields and offering a range of perspectives. The total number of newspapers in Russia is 8,978, and they have a total annual circulation of 8 billion copies. There are also almost 7,000 magazines and periodicals with a total annual circulation of 1 billion copies. Newspapers are the second most popular media in Russia after television. Local newspapers are more popular than national ones, with 27% of Russians consulting local newspapers routinely, 40% reading them occasionally. For national newspapers, the corresponding figures are 18% and 39% respectively. Russia has the largest number of newspaper journals in the world, followed by China and the United States, according to statistics published by UNESCO in 2005. According to the BBC, Russia has a very wide range of newspapers, over 400 daily for every field. In recent years, companies close to the Russian government, such as Gazprom, have acquired several of the most influential newspapers. However, the national press market still offers its consumers a more diverse range of views than those same consumers can sample on the country's leading television channels. Major Russian newspapers with foreign owners include the Smart Money and Vedomosti. In English it will be The Record. Arguments and Facts is a weekly newspaper based in Moscow and a publishing house in Russia and worldwide. The second famous newspaper in Russia is considered to be Life. The most important business newspapers are The Record and the influential Businessman. Many newspapers are opposition-leaning, such as the Critical, Independent newspaper and New newspaper, which is known for its investigative journalism. The main English-language newspapers are Moscow Times and the St. Petersburg Times. 6 of the 10 most circulated Russian newspapers are based in Moscow, while the other 4 are based in other cities and regions. Well, main newspapers in Russia, or the most famous newspapers, are Russian newspaper and newspaper The News. The newspaper's Labor is a Russian newspaper published by the government of Russia. The daily newspaper serves as the official newspaper of the government of the Russian Federation, publishing government-related affairs such as official decrees, statements, and documents of state bodies, the promulgation of newly approved laws, presidential decrees, and government announcements. The newspaper Komsomol Truth is a daily broadsheet newspaper in Russia. It was a newspaper of record in the Soviet Union from 1917 until the dissolution of the USSR in 1991. The Businessman is a nationally distributed daily newspaper published in Russia, mostly devoted to politics and business. It is a leading liberal business broadsheet. The Record is a Russian-language business newspaper published in Moscow.
On the 5th of May 1912, Pravda, the official newspaper of what was to become the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, was first published. Prior to the foundation of the CPSU, many revolutionary socialists belonged to the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. It was the RSDLP that had originally split into Bolshevik majority and Menshevik minority factions in 1903. An early version of Pravda appeared later that year, although at the time it was a journal without political affiliation. Its editorial board gradually began to include active members of the RSDLP, and by 1909, when its headquarters were moved to Vienna, the board was dominated by Bolsheviks under the editorship of Leon Trotsky. The Central Committee of the RSDLP had first suggested making Pravda its official mouthpiece in 1910, but it wasn't until the Mensheviks were expelled from the party in January 1912 that this was to happen. The Bolshevik leader, Vladimir Lenin, moved the paper to St. Petersburg, and the first edition was published on the 5th of May, the anniversary of Karl Marx's birth. The first edition of the newspaper consisted of just 4 pages and focused on workers' issues. As its circulation steadily increased to as many as 60,000 copies by July 1914, Pravda was shut down by the Tsarist government's censors. Despite this suppression, Pravda continued to be printed under a series of pseudonyms. The newspaper formally reopened following the February Revolution of 1917, and by the 15th of March that year, it was being co-edited by Joseph Stalin following his return from exile. Pravda remained the official newspaper of the Soviet Communist Party until it was abolished in 1991. The newspaper, however, continues to exist, albeit not as a daily publication.
As we have already learned some facts about Russian newspapers, let's turn to Kyrgyz newspapers. The mass media in Kyrgyzstan experience greater freedom compared to neighboring countries in the region. And the constitution guarantees freedom of the press and prohibits censorship. However, the media are still restricted by the government. It should be noted from the outset that, similarly to other modern societies, in the structural aspect, the system of journalism in Kyrgyzstan is represented by several groups of mass media, which are differentiated by the production technology and a number of other characteristics, such as electronic media, that is, television, radio, internet. The second one is print media. Well, they are newspapers, magazines, newsletters, digests, entertainment periodicals. The third one is information services. They are agencies, press services, public relations agencies. And the last characteristic is professional associations, unions, and clubs. Due to the changes in status and characteristics of media, on the one hand, and the absence of real mechanism of monitoring these processes, the proposed classifications cannot claim absolute fullness and verification. Media are an activity which is, in terms of its publishing characteristics, not transparent for the public. The self-identifications of newspapers and magazines that traditionally existed during the Soviet period as printed bodies of specific bodies seem to have been entirely overcome. The newspapers believe it sufficient to identify themselves as just daily newspaper, public and political newspaper, and so on. That is, newspapers themselves don't give the public any understanding of their territory of distribution, with the exception of several newspapers that define themselves as national. The same relates to circulation audience covered and other most important typological characteristics. Kyrgyzstan's Word is an all-nation Russian language newspaper published in Kyrgyzstan. The Evening Bishkek is a daily Russian language newspaper published in Kyrgyzstan as well, and it was founded in 1974, but it was known as Evening Frunze since 1991. Stream is a Kyrgyz language bi-weekly newspaper published in Kyrgyzstan. It is privately owned. Print media is one of the oldest sources of information. Print media once occupied one of the leading positions among the preferred media sources. But over time they have given way to newer and more advanced media. In the course of media research, it was revealed that the audience of print media is 47.1%. Rural residents are much more likely to read newspapers than urban residents. This result may be a consequence of the lack of time for the urban population to read printed publications. They prefer sources that can be used in parallel with their main activities, such as listening to the radio on the way to work or watching TV while cooking. This also can be explained by the fact that at the moment there are many print publications aimed specifically at a female audience, while there are times fewer such publications for men. It is also worth noting that the share of readers of print media in internet version in the city is higher than in rural areas, due to a possible reason for the low level of internet penetration in rural areas. The region of residence also affects the propensity of the population to read newspapers. In the northern regions of Kyrgyzstan, the proportion of the population reading print media is higher than in the southern regions. First of all, this is due to the fact that residents of the Talas region were the most active audience reading print media, where 69.1% of all respondents read correspondence. The population of Bishkek in the northern regions, on the contrary, is the most passive public of printed publications. Despite the huge opportunities to read not only paper versions of newspapers, but also to have access to online publications, the share of readers of online versions of newspapers among Bishkek residents remains below the national average. Another factor that determines the propensity to read print media is the gender of the population. The proportion of women reading print publications, both online and in paper versions, is higher than the proportion of men. You can see this from this chart. This result is quite predictable, as researchers in many countries have concluded that women are more inclined to read this kind of material than men. Print media of Kyrgyzstan provide a huge selection of publications that will satisfy the desires of any readers. Over 29% of the population prefers the publication Superinfo. This newspaper is interesting for both young and older generations, as its content covers serious political and economic topics and light entertainment. The second most popular publication is the newspaper Evening Bishkek. It is read by about 4.7% of all respondents. These are the most famous newspapers in Kyrgyzstan. Superinfo is private Kyrgyz language newspaper daily with 88,000 circulation. Evening Bishkek is private Russian language newspaper daily with 45,000 circulation. Apart from the newspaper Superinfo, there are no print outlets focused exclusively on entertainment. Some bloggers cover entertainment topics such as traveling. Evening Bishkek stays afloat mainly with the support of sponsors, notably politicians who invest in them. Print media provide an opportunity for their readers to choose the language in which information is provided. Regardless of the version of the printed edition, the main language that readers prefer is still Kyrgyz. However, about 35% of readers of online versions of print media prefer Russian language publications and about 6% prefer Uzbek language publications. At the same time, residents of rural areas in the absolute majority prefer printed publications with the Kyrgyz language of presentation. And the choice of urban residents is almost evenly divided between Kyrgyz language and Russian language publications. Erkinto is the first national publication of Kyrgyzstan in the state language. The very first edition of Erkinto in 1924 was almost completely at the power of artistic and journalistic genres, essays and compositions. The choice of these genres was dictated by the fact that the authors had a great desire to share their personal emotions with the audience. Panelists said most journalists in Kyrgyzstan opt for quantity over quality in their work and don't dedicate enough time to fact-checking. Heavy workloads were cited as a primary reason for this superficial approach. A popular newspaper for progressive youth was Lenin's Path. It was first published on November 7 in 1926. It is worth paying attention to the features of the genres chosen by the editorial board during the period of the greatest heyday of the newspaper, namely in the 80s of the 20th century. At this time, information and analytical genres were in relative balance on its pages, and artistic and journalistic ones were also encountered. Pride of place in the pages of Lenin's Path takes the genre of event notes. Basically, such texts are devoted to the working achievements of the Republic in various fields of agriculture and production. By giving a general picture of the state of affairs, the note can enrich the facts with some details hitherto unknown to readers, without going deep into the processing of the situation.
You did an awesome job, guys. Now you will be comfortable enough to talk about press and newspapers in Russia and Kyrgyzstan. See you next time.